Hello and welcome to the Sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Standard Open in Atlanta. I'm Nick Miller alongside team captain of the Metagame Gurus, Jim Davis. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Your team has been absolutely crushing the SCG Tour lately.
It's been going well. It has been going well.
We have a new Standard Open. The last Standard Open, of course, won by you. And instead of playing Bant Company, you're playing a blue-red Eldrazi deck.
Yes, this deck is something else.
Explain why it's something else.
Sure. So it's at first glance, it looks very, very confused. It's like, is this a ramp deck? Is this a control deck? I mean, like, we're playing counter spells. Want to cast a 10 drop? Like, what kind of holds it together? And it ends up just working really well because the counter spells are just really, really, really good in this format. Like, everyone's trying to resolve 4 and 5 mana Planeswalkers, 4 mana instants, 5 mana angels, and like the counter spells are just great. The problem is that like, you can't really just sit back forever on your counter spells because there's no like Sphinx's Revelation, a really good kind of like card draw spell to get you in. So you can't really take like full control of the game.
Yeah.
So this deck kind of like bridges the gap by just casting Ulamog.
Yeah. Ulamog has just become the piece or the finisher du jour of the big decks at this point in Standard.
Yes.
If it does something that makes the game last, you play Ulamog.
Right, yeah, and Ulamog's pretty good at what it does. Eats a bunch of stuff, kills very fast, doesn't die to a lot of things in the format. Anguish Unmaking, Declaration in Stone, it's really it. Alternate Price, Languish, Obnix always cards just can't kill it. So when it hits, it usually hits, and even if they do deal with it, I mean, usually it's going to be taking away 2 of the best permanents, and often flashing back the Kozilek's Return from the graveyard as well.
All right, we chuckled a bit when you mentioned how the deck looks, because it definitely has a lot of things going on. There's cards all the way up the curve. From from the sideboard, you can go up to 1, all the way up to 10.
Yep.
So you've got Fiery Impulse in the main deck as well. So you're stretching everywhere, and you've got a ton of different lands in this deck too. For a blue-red deck, you have 12 colorless lands.
10 or 12. I think it's 10.
Yeah,
10 or 12.
It's
somewhere
an absurd
in there.
amount. You've got Majoring, Spawning Bed, and the Temple.
Yep. Yeah. So Majoring Network is kind of the card that makes the deck work. Anyone who played with the old storage lands in the old Mystical Teachings decks recognizes how good they are in any sort of control deck because you play it and you leave mana open, and they either cast something and you counter it, or they don't and you charge. And in those decks, you were charging up to like a big card draw spell or something later on in the game. This deck, you're charging up for either that, where you're going to play a spell with mana open, or just casting Ulamog.
Yeah.
So like, the 4 Majoring Networks are basically what makes the deck run. I mean, one of the most important cards in the deck, especially in slower matchups. And then the Shrine of the Forsaken Gods is also really good because it's just a land. It's colorless, you play it, you cast your colorless spells. And then in the mid-game to late game, tapping for 2 allows you to cast Drowner of Hope with mana open, or just cast Ulamog ahead of schedule.
Right. Yeah, you got all the utility here that allows you to kind of juke and jive through whatever you're trying to do. And then of course you got Drowner of Hope, the card that kind of broke open the Eldrazi decks in Modern that allowed Displacer shenanigans, kind of led you to break the mirrors in a lot of situations. Here's just a very good card.
Right, yeah, Drowner's 7 power for 6 mana, less sometimes with your fancy lands, and just being a colorless 5/5 creature is really, really good in this format. Yeah. Alternate Price, Languish, Grasp of Darkness, these cards just can't kill it. So against the decks like Bant Humans or Bant Company, they want to kind of have creatures, it's bigger than those creatures. Against control decks, it's multiple threats. Like I've had multiple black-white opponents today like have to cast Languish and Grasp. They take 6 mana to waste their entire turn just to kill my Drowner of Hope. Yeah. And then I untap and play something else. It's a solid 2 for 1. And when the card sticks, it's obviously very, very good. You can tap flyers, you can get aggressive with it. And again, it's really cool because you can cast it off of your Majoring or your Shrine, and with mana open to counter things as well.
Just allows you to be super flexible with how you want to deploy your threats. And then also, in a worst case scenario, allows you to ramp as well.
Right, yeah, so and there's times where you just play it and they kill it and you just cast Ulamog the next turn because there's a +2 mana. So
Ulamog's the big finisher here. But we also have 2 Planeswalkers. We've seen a bunch of Chandra the Flamecaller all over Standard. But Jace, Unraveler of Secrets, hasn't gotten a lot of love.
Yeah, Jace is actually really good. I mean, I think it's sort of like a product of the format where it's not super good because the card Collect the Company is so good against it. I guess Avacyn as well. Yeah. But it's sort of like Jace the Mind Sculptor mini, where like if you're able to sort of make the play where they have 1 threat, you play Jace and bounce it, you're just in like amazing shape. Because you get to untap with all your mana open, now you can start scrying and drawing cards, and now you're just like in the driver's seat. It's only 2. It's definitely not a card you want like a ton of. It can be a little awkward at times. It doesn't really mop up like a congested board very well. So it's definitely kind of like a a mid to late game sort of card draw engine, and not really a finisher in the sense where it's going to kill your opponent, but it's going to bury them in card advantage.
Chandra can kind of allow you to do that on the other side, though. Sweeps
Right.
the board and gives you a way to kill your opponent. So.
Right, and Chandra's also very good at pressuring Planeswalkers. Because the thing about this deck that the other guys on the team didn't like was that once something resolves, like a Gideon or an Obnixilis or a Reality Smasher, we have a lot of ways to get it off the board, especially Planeswalkers.
Sure.
So Chandra's kind of like your Planeswalker removal, as is Drowner. You know, attacking Planeswalkers is your main plan of removing them. So Chandra's obviously very, very good at that.
Removal suite, you got some Spatial Contortions, a Fiery Impulse, Kozilek's Return, which of course has great synergy with Ulamog.
Yes.
Allows you to not only deploy a threat, but clean up a bunch of tokens from the green-white decks.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, the combination of Kozilek's Return and Ulamog almost makes the deck work. I mean, Ulamog's great, but there are definitely a lot of tokens in the format, and a lot of small creatures, and being able to actually just clean mop up is very, very important. And honestly, just an instant speed Pyroclasm for 3 mana is just very good in a very instant speed control deck. Because you're putting your opponents in a lot of spots where like they have to decide if they want to deploy more threats or not, when are they going to time their spells, and being able to fire in the Pyroclasm at some point on their turn where it's most beneficial to you is great. And if they like have 2 creatures in play, don't commit anything else, you can just take the hit and then end step do it, which is great as well. So it doesn't kill some of the bigger butts in the format, but front side's pretty good, and then the back side's great with Ulamog as well.
Then, of course, you got kind of your card drawing package. Although Hedron Archive can allow you to ramp as well, it's also your kind of card draw after the fact. But then Shaheen Soorani would be pretty happy. We got some Epiphany at the Drown Yard. He tried to make this card work a lot, and now it looks really good here in a situation where you can just sit back and build up the majoring.
Right, so yeah, I mean, in this deck it's great because, like, again, we're almost operating completely at instant speed, except for our, like, big threats. So it's just a great end-step card drawer, and the deck also just makes a ton of mana, and X spells are usually good with a ton of mana. So I cast it for 10 about half an hour ago.
Yeah,
Jeff Hoolman.
I was going to ask, what's the biggest one you've cast, and how many cards have you net?
X was 9, 10 cards. The split ended up being 6 versus 4, and I got the 6 because the 4 had the Ulamog in it. So
that's a pretty good rate.
Right, and it's also just like, Fact of Fiction is like my favorite card ever, and I just love cards that have like little sub games and mini games in them, and like it's just awesome. Even though I'm making the piles and you're picking them, I'm still picking the piles the way I think you're going to mess up. I'm giving you a chance to mess up, and just like, it's just really fun. It's a really fun card.
Sideboard, you got a ton more removal spells just all over the suite. But then we got another Eldrazi along Reality Smasher. We see this guy all the time, but you know, the Prophet here looks very good.
Yeah, Prophet's great. Old control decks, I used to play the card Azure Mage. It's a 2-1 from Magic, maybe M14 or something.
Sure.
2-1, 15. And 4 mana, same thing, draw a card. And it's the kind of card where, like, in any sort of control mirror, you just play it early, and then you untap, and then every turn, if they don't play something that you counter, you draw a card. So it's a great, you know, kind of like rock and a hard place for your opponent, because they either play something and it gets countered, or you just keep drawing more cards.
Right.
And this costing 1 is even better, because now you can play it on turn 1, and turn 2 have Negate and Clash available. So a 1 mana card of this nature is very, very good. But the issue, of course, is that it's kind of awkward. What blue control deck that has a lot of colorless mana would want this card? And here it is. This is the deck that would want
This
it.
is the exact deck where you would want a card like this.
Right. Like if that card activated for 4 colorless, and not, or I guess not a colorless mana, just 4 generic mana, it would probably be played a lot.
Yeah.
But the colorless restriction is obviously a pretty serious one.
And again, works with all your colorless lands and things that allow you to do that. But yeah, being able to slip under all the removal and counter spells and things like that, and force them to have to deal with this card on your terms, just seems very good.
And if they do, it's a 1 mana card. You know, I mean, all right, sure. You know, you spend 3 mana to kill my 1 mana card. That's great.
Yeah.
You know, so
more counter spells between Dispel and Negates, just fighting the Planeswalkers and then the counter wars.
Yep. I mean, your sideboard is basically like geared towards making you better against whatever matchup you're playing against. I guess that's pretty obvious. But I mean, like, against the small creature decks, you need more removal, your counter spells aren't as good. And then against the bigger, sort of like mid-rangey decks, your counter spells are obviously very, very good. And you can shave your kind of smaller removal spells like Fiery Impulse and Spatial Contortion.
So this deck is like hard to categorize where it falls on the spectrum. You know, if you look at like Patrick Chapin's book, Where on the Wheel It Falls. You know, what draws you to this deck over just like a pure control deck versus like a ramp deck?
It's like, well, I typically don't like ramp decks because they're very like kind of linear. Just like, all right, this is Pilgrimage, Vegetation. Here's my big thing. Is it good enough? And like, I want to have a lot of play in my games. I really enjoy having a lot of little sub games and
You say that
instant
despite
speed.
winning the Players' Championship with, with that deck.
When you got to do it, you got to do it. You know, but like I typically enjoy playing decks where I'm giving my opponent a lot of choices. You know, I want to make them decide: do I play this now? Do I play this later? And you know, you get these kind of deep, you know, just deep, interesting game states. And like this deck does that very well. But it also has a big top end as well, which like the control decks in this format just don't have. So like, you can't play control unless you're playing a deck like this, which has a way to kind of finish the game quickly. Very similar to Nahiri in Modern, where Nahiri made the Jeskai deck playable because the deck was a control deck and it's great, but now it has its way to win the game quickly. Just this sort of powerful threat that ends the game fast, and control decks really need that with how modern Magic is right now.
Right. All right. Well, there anything else you want to add? You're the only one on your team playing this deck, so you thought it was pretty good for this weekend?
Yeah, we split up a little bit this tournament. It's not required. We all play the same deck, and it's kind of a comfort thing. Everyone else, kind of saw this deck, and they're like, "You sure, Jim?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure. The deck seems great." So everyone's playing different decks, but we are very happy to announce that we have 2 new partners.
All right.
Joining BCW, we have Card Hoarder, it's an online card store, and then we have Ink Playmats, who makes custom playmats and also custom gaming supplies. And we're super excited to be on board with them, and things are going great in the world of Team MTG.
All right, well, you guys are crushing the series. You're doing well. You got all the sponsors. So, Jim, thanks for joining me here in the Sideboard. Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all weekend long for the action here in Atlanta.